Good evening, and thank you all for coming to the Shrewsbury Public Library. I'm Priya Ratnam. I'm the Assistant Director of the library, and it's my pleasure to welcome the New England First Amendment Coalition members. Some of them are members. I'd like to introduce Anne Brennan, who's going to be the moderator today. She's the Editor-in-Chief of the Metro West Daily News, the Milford Daily, and 16 Gatehouse Media-owned weekly newspapers. She was previously a digital editor of the Cape Cod Times and its lifestyle and entertainment website. Leah Lamson is the Managing Director of the New England High School Journalism Collaborative. She previously served as Executive Managing Editor of the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. She's also the Chairwoman of the Women's Initiative of the United Way of Central Massachusetts. Susan Spencer covers regional Worcester County news as well as health, investigative, and environmental issues for the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. She's worked for the daily newspaper as a staff reporter for 8 years plus an additional 5 years as a freelance correspondent. Jonathan, I assume.
Hi, everybody. Yes. I'm sorry for being late.
No, you're welcome. He represents newspapers, entertainment, and news broadcasters, publishers, universities, nonprofit organizations, and individuals in cases involving a variety of constitutional issues, and he is a board member of the New England First Amendment Coalition. I would also like to thank Justin Silverman, Executive Director of the New England First Amendment Coalition, who helped coordinate this event. And over to Anne, who's
right here. So tonight we're going to take your questions, and if there's a lull in the action from you folks, we have some topics we want to talk about. But we are living in a very historic time, a time of change in technology, change in politics, and what might turn out to be a change in the world order. And along with that, there's been these times in history, all through that time, the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, have been sacred in our government. And we'll take your questions about why that is, and hope it stays that way.
Did you want us to do introductions, or I guess
Yes.
we already?
Okay, well, why don't we start off get the ball rolling. Susan, why don't you start off with what a reporter does, and what does your day look like? How do you pick the stories that you're reporting? And Leah, you can take it for what an editor does once the reporter gets their work to do.
She hired me, so she knows what a reporter does. And
it was a good hire.
Yeah, and I don't think she's killed any of my stories. She might have had to bring the lawyers in for a few, but no. The reason I really was eager to participate on these panels, I've done another one in another library in Leominster, was because I think, especially in this era where news is and journalism is under attack from all over, and there's this whole fake news, I think that it's very important that you understand what professional journalists do and how we do our work, and also that because I'm a local journalist, I mean, I live in Worcester County. I don't live in Shrewsbury, but I live in town south of Worcester, and I work in Worcester, and I'm in your towns all the time, and I know you in a certain way that the national press is just not going to be able to grasp the issues that are most important, and are not going to know who the people are or what the, just your battle to build this beautiful library, yeah. I'm sure. Now, I was not covering that one in particular, but I've seen similar things in other towns. So having a vibrant local news community is important to your civic life. Even as my husband likes to joke that, I cover selectmen's meetings, so you don't have to, so you don't have to go to them. But I will say, people, nobody cares about zoning until they put an asphalt plant next door. And right now, big case in Charlton that's going on, nobody cares about zoning until a 1 million square foot marijuana growing facility grows in across the street. Then people become concerned. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but just so you know, local news is important and it is vital for democracy. So what do? Well, I actually don't spend as much time going to meetings as I used to because as we cut back with the business pressures that are facing the news industry. But a lot of it is just knowing the communities I cover. I tend to focus a little bit more on the Blackstone Valley towns. That was the region that I was originally hired to cover. But there are issues that are constantly going on there that will raise questions. That will raise questions about is this a proper, is this something that the community needs to know about for its is there something possibly unsavory going on here, or is it something that the community needs to go about for its vital life? I will then I write a story quickly, usually on deadline, sometimes there's long-term investigations, and that means a lot of getting public documents, which is why the public records laws are really important. Massachusetts is not very good about that compared to some states, but we keep fighting for those records. The open meeting laws are important so that your government officials aren't doing things out of view. And I call people, we talk to people. We generally don't use anonymous sources. If somebody needs to be anonymous for a very particular reason, and there are very, very few reasons that we would accept that. Sometimes in the healthcare field, you've got somebody who's been sexually abused or something like that. I discuss it with the editors. And I used to say that I always had 3 editors looking over me before it went to print. That was a couple years ago. In the days of cutbacks now, we've got, there's usually 2, sometimes, but always at least 1. I don't just publish directly to the web and to the print. There's, and if there's anything that's the least bit controversial, that might result in a lawsuit or something, then it goes to the editors, and they really, might have to even call up the lawyers and see about that. And then it goes to print. If it's a different topic every day, it's a different issue, so it's really hard to say what is a typical day. I make phone calls. I've got a cell phone that I use more than my landline, and I'm reaching people all over the place. And so then it's out there, then the story's out there. If we make a mistake, and this is something else that's different from that professional journalism is different about, is that if we make a mistake, we correct it, assuming we find out we made a mistake. So please, if you see something that needs correction, let us know. We want to set the record straight. We will correct it. And actually, the important thing is, I see some museum people here. They've got the shirts. If you're at the museum, there's a wonderful exhibit about a class. It was an advertisement for the Washington Post. And we're all mostly old enough to remember Watergate, so it was advertising their classifieds, and it said, "I got my job through the Washington Post," and it was signed Gerald Ford. So, the Washington Post was a local newspaper for DC. That had an impact on its community. We like to think that the Telegram and Gazette has an impact on our communities. I can just have a few examples here, a couple years ago, but this was an investigative story on a public construction disaster that I picked up from covering the town of Sutton, but realized that it had affected a lot of towns in our community. This was a TLT construction company. They had been hired under the state municipal contracting laws to work on Wachusett Regional High School, Norfolk Aggie, Walpole Public Library, a whole bunch, some libraries, Foxborough. Would always come in as the lowest bidder, and because of the state contracting laws being the way they were, they had to get the bid, they had to get the contract, and then they would just shaft everybody, and then the communities were left scrambling and having to find their way out of that. And they did that because there's a loophole in the state contracting law. Well, since this came out, State Senator Mike Moore has filed a bill that defines fraud in a very specific way that would close that loophole. Now, I'd like to say that has passed and the world is safe for public contracting. It's awaiting a hearing, again. Has not yet passed, but at least we shined the spotlight on that issue of public contracting. And these are multi-million-dollar projects that cost taxpayers a lot. plus the whole issue with a school building, you know, if you get behind schedule on that, you've got a problem. I mean, Sutton they were housing their students in a church for most of a year. So you know, we can make a difference in your community, and that's what we do. I like to think that if we can say, the concern is that the reason people don't trust somebody or something is they'll say, I don't know you and I don't understand you, so I don't trust you. Well, we hope that we can be transparent to you about what we do, and we hope that we do know you as a community and that you know us, so hopefully we can build the trust of the community.
And Leah, once you get a story, what is the editor's role?
Well, as Susan said, usually it will be edited by a line editor, a copy editor, or the city editor, and only if it's got some issues regarding some legal ramifications, or even some questionable fairness issues. You know, did we get the other side of the story? This person is reluctant to talk, so how do we present the other side? So that's pretty much what an editor will do. I used to have a saying that I tried never to invoke, and that was because I'm the mommy, that's why. Because stories would cross my desk, and there would always be a very healthy discussion with the reporter, with another editor, before, you know, if there are any kinds of issues that we felt needed to be addressed. We would meet as a group and we would talk about that rather than me just saying, no, take that out or run it. There would always be a discussion, and I think that again, speaks to the strength of journalism in terms of the fact-checking, the fairness issue, the truth, all of those, accuracy, obviously. But what I would say too, and Susan is symbolic of that, is the Telegram and Gazette when I worked there, and probably still is considered a medium-sized newspaper. So we didn't hire students right out of journalism school. In fact, that was the situation when I was hired back in 1930. That, you know, we look for that solid foundation, but then we usually want 2 to 5 years experience at a smaller daily newspaper before we hire them on the staff of the Telegram and Gazette. And I think for the most part that still pretty much holds true. So we don't have, excuse me, inexperienced cub reporters. We have reporters who have, you know, paid their dues, so to speak, and worked at other newspapers.
At Metro West and Milford, we do have the beginning reporters. In fact, last summer we had Susan's son in our newsroom as an intern. So it's different. At the Cape Cod Times, it was more like your situation at the TNG in terms of experience of reporters you hire. So it's been a little bit of a different situation, but you know, the editors are working much more closely with somebody who's newer to the business and helping them gain the ethics and just understanding you know, how much journalists navigate agendas all the time. So, and that the more seasoned you are, the more able you are to do that navigating, like where did this information come from? Why are they telling me this? Is this worth a story? And those are some of the things that editors help with as well.
Anne has a wonderful thing that she says to new reporters.
This is on TV, so I can't say it as starkly as I'd like to. But I tell them, you know, you can't make SHIT up just to get them shocked by you can't make it up. You can't copy anybody. Plagiarism is a fireable offense. And ask questions. Nobody expects you to know everything. Even, I don't care how seasoned you are, ask questions. I'm sure both you have questions. I'm sure you do too sometimes, right, in the legal. So always asking questions and knowing who to ask to make sure that you're on the right track, or if, you know, am I reading this right? You know, how do I go about doing this? But that's my little speech, and I guess someone my age saying that word to a younger person is pretty shocking. So
We had a saying, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
yes, yes. So, well, some of the more controversial things, John, in the news these days, as social media platforms are starting to, kick people off, like Alex Jones is an example. He was kicked off Facebook and I think and Twitter and YouTube and some other people as well. Why is that not a violation of their freedom of speech? And in Alex Jones' case, is even the violation of freedom of press?
Did you read my shirt? Freedom of speech is not like to be stupid.
But from a legal
That's one
sense and the
reason.
constitutional sense.
Right. Well, so the First Amendment is designed to protect us from actions of government. And so the government can't say generally, thou shalt not publish this. The government can't say, this is a public square, but you don't have the right to be on it. But private parties do. So the reason that, and this is a kind of developing area of the law, but the traditional view would be Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of those private companies can let on or keep out whoever they want, the same way you guys could all say to me, if I come in and say, I have a great article that I really want you to publish. I'm telling you, it's tremendous. I have great ideas. You'd all be within your rights to say, sorry, pal, that's, we're the publisher. You're not, Godspeed, but we don't want your work. And so that's the kind of idea that has allowed these social media networks to make decisions about who can be on and who can be off. What I think some people are in some cases are coming out about this, is that necessarily the right result these days? Have these companies become so big and so important that you really should have, they should be treated as if they were the government. And so they should have to demonstrate why you or I don't have a right to be posting online. But right now, the view is, no, that's not a First Amendment violation because the First Amendment is intended to protect us from the government. And if you're not the government, then you don't have to comply with those kinds of First Amendment obligations.
Is there a press issue with somebody like Alex Jones who had his own show?
Well, I mean, I kind of think it's, shows get canceled, right? And sometimes they get canceled because they say controversial things and advertisers run away and a private company says, sorry, we're losing money, you're not worth it, see you later. It does raise, I hear what you're saying, and it does raise issues about what if there's so much control by big companies that, certain voices are not getting heard at all. And I think that's something that we would all worry about, but really and truly, I think the law right now is not set up to deal with that. The law is set up to deal with, it all started with the king, right, saying you can't use this printing press. And that's really what the First Amendment was born of. And so private entities making editorial decisions is, in fact, considered part of their First Amendment rights. So the editorial discretion that you folks all have to decide what you're going to publish and what you're not going to publish, that is considered well within your First Amendment rights. And so these big social media companies would say they are simply exercising their First Amendment rights of editorial discretion.
I used to find also, John, that there's, to kind of underscore one of the points you made, that there's a lack of knowledge by many people in the public regarding the fact that we are a business and a private institution and not, governed by the government. And I remember getting phone calls, story tips, and people would say, well, you've got to run this story and you've got to write my story. And I'd say, well, actually, we don't have to. And they'd say, well, I'm going to call the mayor. and tell them that you're not gonna print my story. And I said, well, go right ahead.
They're probably happy.
Right.
We come up against this issue a lot with letters to the editor, and I would say that we publish probably 98% of letters to the editor, and sometimes we don't publish them for various reasons, but I think that for us is one of the areas. We welcome letters to the editor, so please keep them coming if you're so inclined, but there are some times where there's issues with a letter to the editor about, is this true? You know, is the veracity of what you're claiming true? Are your sources true? Things like that. Yes?
It's very murky nowadays. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad sat in front of Huntley and Brinkley, and you believed them. You listened to Walter Cronkite, and you believed them. Fox is owned by somebody who says what they want to say, and you have to decide, do I want to believe them? Do I believe them? Do I not? It's hard to know who to listen to, and for example, I told my husband last year I would watch the CBS Evening News because they would just give you the news, and I would make up my own mind. But it's very hard nowadays, and I'm not just saying it's just Fox, it's also CNN. So it's a murky slope as to, is freedom of speech saying that I can say whatever I want? When does it cross the line to liable or inciting? You know, it's scary. And I know that every news source, everyone, whether we admit it or not, is biased. Every journalist has their own point of view, and sometimes that slips in. I had a history teacher that showed us beautifully about that. We had a student in the class who was goofing off, and after a few days the teacher said, I can't stand it, and he went and shoved the kid off the chair, and they got out brawling, and they were throwing punches. They went out into the corridor, and we're sitting there stunned. Now this is nowadays, you get up and help them, but whoever side you were on. But we're sitting there, you know, in 1968 going, oh my God. And the head of the department came in and said, don't put your names on it, write down exactly what happened. And after we wrote down, every student wrote down what happened, the teacher walked in laughing, and then he read them. And the story's different, whether you were his friend or you liked the teacher or whatever. So we learned that bias is there, no matter what. However, it's blatant now. It's just, maybe because we're so divisive, but I don't think it started in 2016. It's been starting all along. We're becoming more and more divisive. I just don't, I'm looking at the comedy shows to see what the hell they're saying instead of.
I think if I may, I think one of the things that, we talked a little bit about this earlier, is that with so much media available out there, you know, it's like going to grocery shop in the ketchup aisle and you got so many different choices. The risk that I see happening now is that people make up their own minds and then they only seek out the information that reinforces what they've already made up their minds about. That's one risk. The other thing is, in my work with students now, I see a tremendous energy regarding social activism, which I think is a good thing. You know, these students all want to change the world, but the lesson for them is you check your own feelings, your own biases at the door when you're reporting on a particular issue. And I guess some media outlets and some reporters do that better than others. But I think to be a good news consumer, you need to go to a variety of sources. Don't, just, I have a sister, I always throw her under the bus at sessions like this. She's a Fox News junkie, and, I always say to her, come on, why don't you at least research what CNN or MSNBC is saying about that?
I think it helps when watching broadcast news to really listen to the broadcast and see if they're using adjectives, loaded adjectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with particularly, I know CBS, you won't find that, but if you look at Fox and CNN, their news is really opinion. And I think you don't find that so much on that, or ABC or NBC, they're still very traditional.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's one way that you can judge whether you're getting facts or not, as to how they're reporting it.
One of the impacts of technology is all this stuff around all the time, but it's also a strength because there's a lot of ways you can Google and check things. You know, just looking at the sources, trying to figure out, you know, where did that come from? I remember a cousin of mine put on Facebook that the Pope had endorsed Trump during, you know, previous to the election, and I had just seen something about the Pope saying something not very nice about Trump, you know, and so I Googled it and sent the link, but, you know, everybody has to be, everybody has to be their own editor. You've got, you know, the music platforms where people can listen to the music they want to choose. You know, can listen to whatever TVs, shows you want to watch, whenever you want to watch them. So it's really forced us into becoming our own, you know, news producer, kind of picking what it is that we are going to watch and listen to and read. So it's there's a lot out there, but your critical thinking skills are even more important now than they were, you know, back in 1960s.
And even just reading
Yeah.
beyond the headline, because there's so many media demanding screaming for your attention. And what gets your attention is something that is emotional, something that appeals to your emotions more than your head. So people look on Facebook and Twitter and they see that screaming headline of whatever sensational thing it is, and that will get their attention, but they usually won't go in and read much in depth into the story. And so I think that's just something we as a society, I mean, sure, you know, it's easy to just kind of scan Twitter, but we really have to be more careful about that and actually going through to understand the issues.
In the business of journalism, I don't know how you folks put up with today's environment. And maybe you don't, maybe you can't put up with it. But you know, everything's online. You sit in your iPad, you can read the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, or you can scan Twitter and see the Twitter news and the comments on it. And you get the headline, and you get some comments, and you get all the echo chamber feedback. But where is journalism going to be? As struggling, as much as that you're struggling today, where are you going to be 5 or 10 years from now? I don't see where it's going. I mean, I'd love to be able to sit down and read a newspaper, but the newspaper's old news by the time the ink is dry.
Yeah, I mean,
where are we going?
we post online usually the day before. You see it, you know, as soon as the news is out. But getting people to get past the paywall, what is our paywall? Three stories or something online, but I mean, a digital subscription is not much. It's cheap. Come on, people, please. But that is a constant pressure to get people to actually commit to.
We don't have the attention span
Subscribing.
anymore. We just want to get it fast,
Yeah.
get it quick, tell us,
Yeah.
and that's it. And
I'd like to, you had a question, the man in the green shirt? Yes, I did get the right color.
I mean, in some ways, there's a pattern here, and we're talking about the providers of news, all the sources, be they internet, journalism in all different forms. Meanwhile, there's the recipients of the news. And I think I heard critical thinking as a term being raised. Are there things you know of, and/or are there things that you think ought to be done to perhaps come at the consumers of the news and the information that will make them more capable of discerning what's the real stuff, what's the fake stuff, what's propaganda, et cetera, so they can start appreciating the difference between garbage and, in fact, what is clearly vetted information?
I'd like to take that. I have one example of that, and that is back in November, I believe, a bill was passed and is now law. I don't know when it becomes enacted, but and Senator Harriet Chandler was very instrumental in this, to reintroduce mandatory civics education in high schools. And I think that's what we've got to do. You know, we certainly have to start at that level so that people do understand, you know, reasoning skills, critical thinking skills, so that when they, you know, they can make up their own minds when they are bombarded with this, so much information out there. I think that's key. That's one of the
Civics
things.
get eliminated from the curriculum?
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I don't know.
It was before this, like in the 70s, early 70s maybe. I mean,
High school seems kind of late though nowadays.
Yes,
Kids
right.
are on the
Yeah.
gadgets
Yeah.
since
Or
they're
seventh
little
grade.
kids.
Yeah, we
But
have.
to your point, another way, just so if you're reading it, I mean, are there named sources? Because a lot of the, I don't know, Newslight or whatever that's out there will just say, an expert said, or someone said. Are they named? Are they, can you Google them and find out who they are? You know, that helps too.
And I think at the local level, because we are local, that it's more reliable. And in fact, the Pew Research Center said that more people trust their local news than the national news. But, you know, I hate to keep pitching our local news stuff, but we're closer to it, and, you know, but that's.
It's easier to call us out if we're wrong,
Yeah,
because you might
yeah.
know.
Plus, you might not be focusing on Washington so much, which I think the national
Right.
news does, and
Right.
with the president saying fake news every 5 minutes,
Right.
I think it has a big impact. So do you feel a lot more pressure now, even at the local level, to be more transparent
Yes.
than you did a few years ago?
And that happens, I cover the town of Uxbridge. Uxbridge has it's always had a very historically strange relationship between its local officials and each other, basically. But there is particularly one local official who loves to call me fake news. And I will say, did this not happen? Was this meeting not held? Did this person not say this? Things like that. And no, fake news means he didn't like.
Yeah, there's different definitions of fake news.
Yeah.
There's, did they not like what you wrote
Yeah,
about them,
not
so that
favorable
becomes
to
fake
me,
news?
right.
So there was a court case where he was just recently found to have committed fraud in some various business decisions. When I was writing that, because I was sure he was gonna either try to sue me or come back with just more fake news. Every other sentence was, according to court documents, and I would, quote the court documents, so that just being very meticulous on the source that things come from.
When you're working on a tough story like that, I'm probably, people who listen to NPR have noticed that they no longer just list a reporter for a story, they list the editor for the story as well. And I wonder if newspapers would take that step, or are we just to assume that the editor edited the story? It adds to trust when you know who's working on the piece.
Well, there are editors listed in the paper. There aren't that many editors left, to be
yeah.
honest.
But part of the purpose of
yeah.
a byline, it's like seeing your face on television,
Yeah.
is a name on the page. You come to understand who's worked on that
Right,
story. So I
right.
wonder if that's a second step.
Yeah.
And
By printing that name along with the reporter, reported by and edited by, to help people understand it's been worked over.
yeah, and as Susan said, I know in the Telegram, it would list Nancy Campbell, features editor at the top, on the flag of the features section, so that people would know, that she was accountable and who to call.
There was a question back there?
Oh, yeah, just an observation. I'm a longtime news professional, you guys know me, and I live in town. There are a number of factors here at play today. With social media, it's just, everybody's yakking at once. And it used to be, as somebody was alluding to earlier, you could, watch the nightly news such as, such as Cronkite, such as Humphrey Brinkley, and you could trust them. And now with social media, we used to start from the middle with a set of facts, and then we develop our opinions from that. That's what happened with Watergate. Now, because we're so polarized, we start at the polls. We start at the outer edges and try to work our way in. Those who are going to stick to what they believe will stick to their polls. Otherwise, if you really want to try to find out facts, maybe you'll come back to the middle. Problem with social media today is, with everybody talking, it doesn't cost much nowadays to put something up on the web, as opposed to just the newspaper industry. We have a lot of production costs and labor costs. So when you have this, for want of a better word, cacophony from all different sources, it tends to be confusing for people. And especially for young people who are not as engaged in critical thinking. This is why I've decided to go into teaching to try to preach the mantra of good critical thinking when it comes to media. And yes, about the civics education bill, it is in effect now, and it mandates civics education from 8th grade up, which I think is wonderful. I think, kids need media literacy today, as well as civic literacy, because we're turning the country over to them in a generation or so.
Do they have it every year? 8th grade on up?
They just mandated it this year, so civics will become part of the MCAS in a few years, a necessary part of the MCAS. But now it has been instituted in 8th grade and up.
I'd like to add too that part of the reason, the lobby group for this were high school Democrats and high school Republicans. The kids went to the legislature and lobbied for this. Now they're lobbying for sex education. It's amazing. I don't know, Leah, about this younger group that you're dealing with. If they're different somehow than the people you've dealt with in other generations, but it seems like this one coming up is very active.
Yes, very active, and I see that as a good thing. There are a lot of bright spots in terms of the youth getting involved in journalism. I don't know if you read about the student blogger, was from the Midwest, and actually broke the news about Bill de Blasio getting into the presidential election, throwing his hat in the ring. He was the first one to break that, and all the other media outlets had to give him credit for that. There are other things, like in high school newspapers. Up in Burlington, Vermont, there was a guidance counselor, I believe, who had sort of questionable, or actually that was one where they went after information and were censored by the school administration. But there was another one in the Midwest, again, a high school newspaper, that did some deep dive on a new administrator coming in, and lo and behold, what did they find? She faked her credentials, and they reported that. So I have great faith, those just being some examples, but I also have great faith in, and you, Rick, probably see this too, in the students that I see who are very interested in journalism. I worry a little bit about the social activism part of it, they want to, ride in on their white horses and change the world. Environment for kids right now seems to have trumped gun violence, at least from the kids that I've been in touch with. But I see a lot of great acts of journalism being done by kids in high school, and I think that's wonderful.
Right, because they really care, and I think you're absolutely right. They're taking ownership, and I think that a lot of that happened after Parkland.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where you started, saw kids their own age speaking out in favor of more gun restrictions. Mm-hmm. And I just think that it gave them poetic license to just become more involved.
In Shrewsbury, they do have, in their history class, they do teach a portion of the class on recognizing the difference between legitimate news media and fake news. And so the kids are being taught how you can, as a reader, look at what you're reading and determine whether this is something that's legitimate, and the fact that there are so many news bloggers out there that are coming across as legitimate news media, and they're not. They don't hold themselves to the same standards, they don't have the training, and you see it posted online, and as you were saying, the headline looks suspiciously like a legitimate news source, and suddenly, until somebody calls somebody out and says, check the source. There's a great chart on news media, I've seen it on Facebook, that actually, it's in the shape of a circle, and it actually has the left and the right, and it places all media in those various spots. So as a consumer, you can look at that and you can say, oh, well, that's very interesting. I always thought this source, this newspaper or this television station that I watch is something that is, very centrist, and it's not. And I think it helps when people can see something like that and say, I'm not really looking at a credible news source, or it's so far one way or the other.
But I've seen that or something similar, and I've actually used that with some of my students in the past.
It's terrific. terrific.
to really discern, you know, what are the most reliable sources out there.
Exactly.
What might be left of center, what might be right of center,
Right.
and you know, who tends to twist things a little bit more than what should be, than normal.
Yeah.
And I find it important to read and, you know, understand what it is that you're reading and then seek out the, you know, other side, because understanding where people are coming from, often you see like there's a lot more in common there than you might expect, but it kind of gets lost, you know, but if you're open-minded.
One thing that I think is pretty significant, doesn't answer all of the questions that have been raised here, but you know, if the Worcester paper prints an article, it's responsible for it. It can be sued for defamation, has to defend it. It can be assessed damages if it's found liable. As a result of a federal law, that's not true of Twitter or Facebook or any of the social media companies. They, as long as they're just circulating something that someone else posted, they're treated like they are the telephone company. So, right, if I get on the phone and defame Ann, you can't sue the phone company. They're just carrying my message. You can sue me. And as a result of this federal law, all of these large organizations have been freed of this liability. So the papers have to worry about it, but Facebook doesn't have to, Twitter doesn't have to, YouTube. All those if you ever look and see the crazy comments after a newspaper article,
Never read the comments.
the newspaper's not responsible for those. If you find out who posted it, if you could get to their identity, then that person can be responsible, but not the newspaper. And I do wonder at times if that law, however well intended it was, hasn't contributed anyway to a lot of the misinformation that's circulated.
I'm very worried about the First Amendment, and especially the issues surrounding Julian Assange. And I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts about that, because he deserves to be defended on that ground, but he's such a despicable character that it's going to be a terrible case for the First Amendment, and that I'm very worried about, because then it will set a precedent, and I wonder about your thoughts on that.
I don't know what to make of him for the reasons exactly that you just voiced. But I think, and John's probably the best person to answer this, but I think that there's a saying about the First Amendment doesn't just protect the people who we agree with. It protects others as well. And yeah, I don't know what to make of him, quite honestly, so I'll pass that off to someone else.
It's very problematic, yeah,
It's a very serious issue because, look, reporters can't break into a house to steal information, right? You can't say, well, I'm a reporter, it's very interesting information, it's very important. You'll get prosecuted for breaking into someone's house. But there's a very different rule that's been applied over the years if the reporter is the recipient of a leak of information. So I work for the government. I have an obligation not to disclose this file. Ann doesn't have that obligation. And if I give that information to Ann, then traditionally, well, today, that's the law. She's protected. Now, she could, if it defames someone, she can be in trouble for that. But the fact that she got it from me, who was under an obligation not to disclose it, that fact that's not her concern. Right, exactly. Now, it gets a little more complicated and I think this is where they're going with Assange. If Ann says, well, John, don't you really think you should give me that? You're kind of being a baby about this. Shouldn't you pass on the information? A lot of that happens, right, between a reporter and a source. So to criminalize that is dangerous. If she pays me to break my legal obligation, okay, maybe that's different. If she grabs it from my desk, that's different. But I think that's what many people worry about the Assange prosecution. And in quite the way you phrased it, that it's tough because he's not a likable guy.
And he broke a lot of journalism rules too. I mean, he put a lot of people in harm's way and things like that. But when you were saying about the government, but then what about the Pentagon Papers? That gets more complicated.
It does, but there's, the Pentagon Papers only get you so far, because what the Pentagon Papers established was that those newspapers had the right to publish. They couldn't be enjoined from publishing. The several justices of the Supreme Court said, we're not dealing with today with whether they can be prosecuted for publishing it. We're just saying the court can't order them not to publish it. So it still takes courage for the papers to publish, even though they have the Pentagon Papers precedent behind them. They did not get a blank check to.
It was a different Supreme Court.
Yes, for sure.
This person behind here has been waiting a long time to ask a question.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I am thinking of is it would probably be beneficial for us to take a minute to think about how having this conversation is a privilege and a luxury that we're even talking about this, that there are people all over the world, and this is not even a thing where people would sit in a room talking about this. And I think we don't even think about it, but something spectacular and remarkable is happening right now, and I'm taking a minute to think about it, and I think it's pretty good to think about. Second thing is, as someone who's kind of submerged in the age group or the bracket that you've kind of been addressing, I'm thinking about how a lot of times the culture instructs me that whatever makes me feel good, that's something that I should pursue. And we see that in like in the area of gender, we see it in the area of all different things. And so it makes sense to me that a demographic that is instructed and impressed with the idea to choose what makes a good feeling arise inside them, it makes sense that they would be choosing also their news that way, that their greatest, like the biggest idea in their head would not necessarily be, is this factual, is this something I need to check or not? It's kind of like this is just a theory, that maybe people gravitate toward the feeling that they desire to have. And because we don't, like Walter Cronkite was sort of like a big cake in the middle of a room. And you go in and either you get a piece of that cake, because that's the only cake there is, or if you don't want a piece of that cake, you walk out and you get it somewhere else. And for my generation, we walk in and there's a buffet. And we can choose whatever makes us feel good. And it seems to me that if we're not taught otherwise, then why wouldn't we choose, why wouldn't we like connect our emotions to our activism and to the information that we get? The last thing that I was thinking of was, in addition to civics classes required in schools, I also think it would be helpful to have more mandated conflict management instruction, because what we've been talking about with the back and forth and the national discussion kind of sounds like a couple arguing without trying to get to the heart of it, without trying to seek the best of the other person. It's just kind of a squabble. And so on a huge national level, it's just kind of like a fight between two people who aren't really good at communication and aren't really good at forging beneficial relationships. So I think that might be helpful too.
Yeah, very good points.
Yeah.
I think, it's got to the point where there are some parents who say, if their son or daughter is dating somebody of the opposite political party, And, you know, the question is, you're not gonna marry that person, are you? And it really, it's just come down to that, we've just become so polarized. And you just raise a good point about conflict management, I think it's a worthy idea.
And
My
I
mother
think-
used to say she proudly canceled out every vote my father ever cast.
Like she voted, they both voted.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your first point, because that is something that, you know, we just take for granted. And when I was at the Telegram, we used to have a program with the International Center of Worcester that would bring in foreigners to learn about American culture. And a lot of them were journalists from foreign countries, and they were amazed that we could say whatever we wanted to say, you know, within reason. But the fact that we are protected by the First Amendment is an extreme privilege.
We had journalists from Hungary back before the wall fell, and took him to a town meeting, and he leans over and he's like, "This doesn't mean anything, right? It's just all for show." And I'm like, "No, these people are gonna decide how their money's spent." And he's like, "Really?" You know? And another journalist carried the Constitution in his pocket and wondered why we didn't. Just add that.
My son, the budding journalist, studied in Scotland for a semester at journalism in Edinburgh, and the Scots were totally enthralled with the idea that we had a public records law, the Freedom of Information Act, even as we criticize our own state's limitations on that. I mean, they are, I guess, are just getting into that to the level that is anywhere near us. But the fact that we take that for granted, that we have the right to get documents that our government creates. They sometimes put up a fight, but we have a right.
And that right extends to everybody, not just
Right.
journalists.
Yes. Right.
Everybody.
Yeah, right.
Are there any other questions? I think I saw some hands go up.
I had one, among the many things that President Trump says about the media, from time to time he says, we really need to take out these libel laws and re-examine them, and make some changes. Do you see that happening? Is there any way that would happen?
You know, I have to be honest to say, I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. But I do think it's unlikely. Now, we have Clarence Thomas wrote a dissent this year saying that New York Times versus Sullivan, the actual malice rule that applies to libel cases for public officials and public figures, should be reversed. And one could make I get it, people can make an argument. There's a lot of misinformation around. Maybe that's because nobody is getting sued for lying about, although if you lie, that is what actual malice means. So that the law doesn't enforce that. So I think we should be worried about that kind of a movement. But on the positive side, even this very much more conservative Supreme Court than existed in prior years has been very protective of First Amendment rights. Some people question whether they have an agenda because they're granting First Amendment rights to corporations and the like, but they are very protective of First Amendment rights. So I haven't seen any indication that there's a groundswell, and that's what it would take, groundswell support at the court level for that kind of change. I think him saying he's going to change the libel laws is not a meaningful comment.
Libel is established in case law within the courts. You know, with the exception of, you know, whatever statutes might govern, you know, what somebody might get in terms of damages. I mean, you probably know better than I do.
Yeah, I think people, when they refer to the libel laws, you're absolutely right. It's a common law claim developed by the courts. Same kind of claim if Ann hits me over the head with a bat, there's a claim I can bring for, you know, assault and battery, and defamation arose out of the same kind of, you know, courts deciding it. I think, you know, when he says change the libel laws, I think what he really was saying was it is the law that a public figure must prove actual malice before they can recover for defamation, and I think he'd like to change that. Although I also heard him say, after he made that comment, that he had been told might not be a good idea because he might get sued more than others. So maybe he'll let that one go.
So John, do you want to tell the difference between the New York Times versus Sullivan and public officials and then a non-public official in terms of libel?
Maybe even summarize New York Times versus Sullivan.
Yeah.
I think most people aren't really aware of the basis of that.
Sure. So New York Times versus Sullivan was a case, it's really in some ways a civil rights case. There was an advertisement that ran in the New York Times about a demonstration down south. And that advertisement had described what had happened, and there were some minor errors in the summary. And Sullivan was sort of a local sheriff type, wasn't mentioned by name, but said that people would understand that he was a target of the ad and accused of, he thought, misbehavior in the course of this advertisement for civil rights. And at that time, there were kind of a string of similar libel suits in the South against civil rights demonstrators and people who were writing about civil rights. So when the case got up to the Supreme Court, I think it was about a $500,000 judgment, which today, you hear about $5 million and $50 million. But, go back to 1964, it was a lot of money. And so what the Supreme Court said was, it's inevitable that people will make mistakes, sort of like your 8th grade or whatever class that was in when people were writing their account of what had happened right in front of their very eyes. It's inevitable that people will make mistakes, but if you are speaking about a public official, you should have to prove more than that someone made a mistake. You should have to prove, and they use the term, that they acted with actual malice. It's an unfortunate term because it sounds like if I acted with actual malice, I don't like you. That's not what the term means at all. It means that I either knew I was telling a lie, it's a bald-faced lie, or I seriously doubted whether it was true, but said, what the hell, I'm going to publish this anyway. And so that's the standard that public officials and public figures now have to meet. So you could be wrong if you really believed it, and then you are protected in that kind of a suit. On the other hand, if any of us sued someone for defamation, it would be an easier standard for us to meet because pretend you're suing me. The fact that I believed it was true is a great and perfect defense in an actual malice case. It wasn't a knowing lie. I really, honest to God, believed it was true. But if you're a private figure suing for defamation, I would have to prove, it didn't really matter if I believed it, I would have to prove that I acted reasonably, that I wasn't negligent in making the statement. So, I don't know, it's John J. Smith, not John E. Smith, who's convicted of murder. And it was easy for me to determine that it was John J. and not John E., but I screwed up, I made a mistake, I was negligent, and I identified the wrong guy. Well, a private figure, that's a good defamation case for a private figure. If you're negligent, that the plaintiff's argument would be, if you're reasonable care, if you're really taking your job seriously, if you're acting reasonably, you should have checked the middle initial before you called this poor soul a murderer. So that's kind of the difference in the two standards, and it does certainly makes it harder for public figures and public officials to win libel cases.
Has that been also applied to people that are well-known? Do they come under the public official?
Public officials and public
But they're a
figures.
public figure, yeah.
Yep, if you're famous enough. Yep.
You have a question?
I don't mean to be political here, but what applies to a private citizen, and this is a very general question, what applies to a general citizen, why does it not apply to a president in a country that is so democratic.
You mean for libel and name calling?
Yeah, exactly. Just not name calling. I mean, if as a private citizen, let's say I commit some minor offenses, there's a good possibility that I might face some jail term. But for a similar offense, if the president were to commit, I think the rules are different. Why is such a system existent?
Is that like the separation of powers? Is that what you mean? Like
Well,
it's
I
an
think-
impeachment is the way of...
You may be talking about what we've all heard on TV, right, recently, when Mueller spoke. He said, I am not allowed to bring an indictment against a sitting president. But obviously, we could all be indicted if we did something wrong, or it looked like we did. I think the theory is it would make the president susceptible to being attacked and distracted for political reasons. I think that is the essence of the theory, that you have this period of time where your attention is supposed to be focused on the critical role of running the country, and if you allow prosecutions during that period, I think the theory goes, the president won't be able, it will make it much more difficult for the president to discharge his or her duties. I think
But
that's the
beyond
theory.
that, John, is it the separation of powers where it's up to the Congress then? That's why they have impeachment? Is that...
Oh, that's certainly part of it too. I think part of the rationale is if that happens, we have a remedy. It's impeachment. That's the remedy, and maybe when they're out of office, they could be prosecuted. So I think some people debate about this rule about whether you really are immune from prosecution when you're the president, but it is the Department of Justice policy.
I think the president is held to the laws. I mean, he can't go murder somebody and not be charged for murder,
He
right?
said he could.
That's right, on Fifth Avenue.
But his case will be tried as an impeachment by Congress. So if Congress does their job, they enforce the law against the president. That's civics.
I think
The
that's.
problem is, can you get two-thirds of the Senate to convict?
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't get two-thirds of the Senate to decide they should flush a toilet.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, I have one. You said that there aren't very many editors anymore. Why is that, and is there any likelihood that media outlets will start restaffing to maybe help some of these credibility questions?
Yes, did we bring some subscription forms?
Or just go online and get that digital subscription, it's cheap.
But subscribe to the Metro West Daily.
Just get a gatehouse pass for everything. As there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, and they've been, a lot of the hedge funds that are behind, a lot of the big corporations that are owning newspapers and are cutting costs, editors are sort of that middle level that is, they want to keep content producers, the reporters and photographers to a degree, as much, although we have in the past several years, cut a lot of those as well. And then so the editors are in that unfortunate, they're the buffer level, and they're like middle management that has unfortunately been a target of cuts because it's not immediately obvious that, we're not covering as many stories, although that then happens when the trickle-down effect.
And generally, editors are higher paid than reporters.
That's another one, yeah.
So, if you look.
But still, there's a value.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you can shoot yourself in the foot when you make those
right,
decisions.
There are even some electronic programs out there now where you can send a story to, I don't know the name of a man, you might know, but to be edited. Now, it's not gonna know, that, I always use this example. There was a city councilor up in Gardner, his name was Mimi Canoe, And when we first sent, or I think it was a new copy editor, and he wrote "she" in the headline instead of "he," you know,
Right.
it's not gonna, those technology programs aren't gonna be able to screen that, but other things like just spell check and
But the-
grammatical
yeah.
errors and.
I think Associated Press is using some artificial intelligence programs to do some of their lesser type of reporting, not reporting, but production of say, a story. But
The publishing companies for books too are also getting.
Right. But I agree, it's a valued service, and when we started consolidating, and the model that our current owner, Gatehouse, has is a lot of the editing is done through one place, the copy editing, there's first line editors here, but it's done nationally through a central system. And I remember thinking, because I was, at the time I was reporting on, remember casinos when they were like gonna be a big thing around here? And I was reporting in Milford, and there was gonna be, Fox was gonna have one there, and they were gonna build this whole new like access road to 495, and it was gonna be between exit, I can't remember now, 12 and 13 or something like that. But I remember writing that, and the copy editor happens to live in Franklin, and he said, no, that's not the right exit. And he knew geographically that I had written it down wrong and had the wrong exit number. So he caught it before it went to press. I mean, I worry now about things like that slipping through, because the national aggregating editing site is not going to know if it's exit 12 and 13 or exit 11 and 12.
Right, right.
With the consolidation, especially of local news outlets and newspapers, and in many cases the purchasing of them by larger groups, are you seeing, or have you heard from other colleagues in similar jobs, a change in what gets printed versus what didn't, given that one larger organization is kind of controlling a group? I don't know if that's a clear question.
Well, there's not a political dictation on that. And as I'll say, Gatehouse is agnostic as to the flavor of what we do, but things that are likely to get the most readership response, engagement, clicks, will be more likely to be covered more. We've cut way back on local government meeting coverage, because other than the a couple hundred people in the town who read that stuff, nobody else is going to care about that so much. So we've cut back on, that's unfortunate, because we're not the watchdogs there that we used to be. But we will focus on the stories that will get the larger engagement when there's other than obvious important big news.
I don't know if it's still the case, but back when I was at the Telegram, the video that got the most viewership was the two-faced cat. Frank and Louie, the two-faced cat.
I always say kids, cats, cops, courts, crashes, crazies, and cannabis. And you can change canines for the cats too. Right. So.
But as a recovering digital editor, I look a lot at what people are reading and what they're getting engaged with, and it's I actually was looking today, and it was about stories about people. There was some people attacked a pregnant woman, so that got a lot of traffic. But they were mainly stories about people. Where are they looking to put pot shops and grow facilities? It tends to be more, at least in Metro West, they are looking at more issue stories than like the crime ones. So there's really, a movement to try and understand our audience and what interest our audience has, and then trying to write to that so that we get some loyalty and get subscribers.
So we have a very popular. Do you guys read the Then and Now? You see, there's a Then and Now.
Yeah.
People love that. Yeah. I don't know how to make a C sound out of that, but it's history. But the pictures of here's an old, guess where this is, and here it is now. There are some things like that connect people to their communities that they like. But our big story today was my report that the Whitensville man who buried the dog alive was sentenced to 2 years in jail, 2.5 years in jail, to serve 90 days. So that had crime, courts, canine, and the guy needed a mental health evaluation, so it politically
Was he
incorrect,
smoking
but,
pot?
Yeah, he,
That was
yeah.
disgusting.
So, but that was our number one hit story today.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a second for something that Ian stressed that I think is so important and shouldn't be lost, and that is, you know, we are you. The press is the public. And that's what I always used to say to people. We represent you. And the example I would use is, you know, people say, well, when you were editor, what story were you most proud of? One of them was during Sunshine Week, so that's usually March of each year, newspapers run stories or series on public's right to know issues. And what we did was we sent a team of reporters out in Worcester County to go to police stations and ask to see the police log. Because that is supposed to be available on demand for you, it doesn't matter that we're the press, you know, any Joe Q citizen can walk into the Shrewsbury Police Department, ask to see the police log and should be able to see it on demand. Now, you know, there are issues regarding how timely that it's kept, and there are some things that can be taken out of it. But we did that, and we found it woefully inadequate. And I think the worst case was when one reporter went into one of the police departments, and he was told, and they can't ask your name, they can't ask why you want to see the police log. So he was not only asked his name and why he wanted to see the police log. When he went out to his car, a police officer followed him and took down his registration. So, you know, again, I think the strongest case we can make, or one of the strongest cases, is that we are the public. The press is the public. You know, we used to always strike out the term executive session when the selectmen went into executive session. We would say closed session. It's a closed session. It's not an executive session. So just, you know, a couple of things that shouldn't get lost in all of this about how the press really is the public.
And there's research going on now at Stanford and I want to say, not Holy Cross, it's a big football school.
Notre Dame.
Catholic, yeah, Notre Dame, thank you.
It's in the Midwest.
Yeah, they looked at, you know, they were curious what happens when a local town or a city loses their news outlet. And one of the things they found is that when there's no watchdog in town, if they're gonna, if let's say selectmen want to build a school, the investors are going to charge more interest because there's no one watching. So there's a direct taxpayer impact there. They also found, and this, they found that people are not as likely to vote. But I think that that's an issue I'm seeing in all of the towns, despite how much, you know, we do a lot of, you know, profiles of who's running and, you know, really try to get that information out there, and it just doesn't seem to be enough. I think, you know, we're seeing 9-10% of people coming out to vote in local elections. In the national and state ones, it goes up, but there is a cost to, you know, not supporting your paper, and I'm sorry if that sounds like I'm a shill here, but that's what the research is finding.
I want to know, what did the Telegram do as far as reporting what happened to the reporter who was followed out to his car and had his license number taken down?
Oh, we wrote the story, and we said that we included that information in the story. And we did send a letter to the police chief saying that that was not appropriate for him to do that.
So if this is the law, what comeback do you have?
Well, the chief was embarrassed
Yeah,
by
'cause
being
it
put on the
published it.
spot.
Yeah.
And
Because he got caught.
supposedly trained staff better.
But that kind of thing is happening to somebody who isn't a journalist. Like there's people who might go want the log and they'll say, we want to see your driver's license. And you don't know that that's not the law. Like they're not supposed to ask that, you know? So, you know, that's an instance where you're trying to educate the public about not only were they hindering the reporting, but this is something anybody should be able to ask for.
And I'm not as boned up on open records and public meeting as I used to be, but I don't know if there's been any change in, we used to, I mean, one a week, we'd be writing to the Secretary of,
State.
thank you,
Yeah.
Secretary of State, Public Records Division, Inspector General, whoever. We are writing, and you had to let 10 days go by, and you just, it gets to be overwhelming, and you don't hear back, and you've got to follow up, but I
And
don't
it's-
know if that's been tightened up at all, John.
Well,
And there was no
amend-
monetary,
Right.
you know,
You can't, it's not a crime, so you can't go to jail for doing it, you can't get
If it's a
fined.
law, then why do you say it's not a crime?
Well, because it's a law, but it's a civil law, I guess I put it that way. We have this public records law that says unless, that any document made or received by a government official is a public record. And then they list about 20 exceptions to that rule. And the law also says you can't ask why you're looking for it. A reporter doesn't have more right to an information than you do. So this, this violated various parts of that law, but the violation of that law, what the statute says is, and if someone violates the law, you can sue and get an order that they comply with the law. Now, sometimes that's helpful if you want the document and you sue and you can get the document. And they've now added an attorney's fees provision, so
Okay.
that can be a disincentive to the town or the state because they say, maybe I don't want to have to write a check to the newspaper's lawyer. But that's some of the complaints about the law have been that it is relatively toothless.
I'm wondering what you advise us as, people that advocate, as advocates for the First Amendment. What should we do to help ensure that the First Amendment is not in jeopardy and that it's not, that people understand, how important it is, how crucial it is, how vital it is?
buy a T-shirt like they have.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, one of the things, now, Shrewsbury, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't cover your government, are you representative town meeting or are you open town meeting? Okay.
Representative.
Okay, so I'm less familiar with that, how that works on a day-to-day basis than the open town meeting, but it's sad that you have towns where you might have 100 people at town meeting, and that, as boring as it is, they go through line item by line item on the budget before it's voted on.
Mm-hmm.
And if more people would at least get the town meeting warrant, or read whatever document is sent out or made available to, if it's a representative town meeting, and go over that before your local, you are the local legislative body, basically, and demand those documents. And if there's what are these humongous legal fees for? Then you find out that the town's been sued for X, Y, and Z, or the town manager's corrupt or something. Question those documents. That's probably the easiest thing to do to find what is going on in a town, is read your town budget and ask questions.
I also think getting in touch with your legislators,
Yeah.
if you see something that you feel is affecting the free speech or free press, or, register your feelings with your legislators. It does make a difference if they hear from a lot of people. It used to be like a phone call, like the letter was the gold standard. They'd read the letter, phone call was the least effective unless there were like millions. Email and then letter, but not very many people send letters anymore. But, by email, even calling though, if you, just at all levels, whether you're talking about the selectmen, if you see a story that, like what they did, call up, and if you're mad about it, tell the chief, or tell the town administrator, or the state legislature, or your federal representatives.
Okay.
I think.
Isn't there something good, though, about events like this, I'm thinking? Like, all you people
Yes,
showed up
I know.
here because you care about this, and you all have family and friends, and you're going to be talking to them about about this, so I kind of feel like this is part of the answer, to see people like this coming out on a night. You could be home having a,
Watching CNN?
right.
Or at least the Bruins
That's
are
good.
playing.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
And it's
The new
good there's
Jeopardy
an
winner.
organization
Right.
like yours,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that all of you are volunteering your time. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yes, and you could donate to the New England First Amendment Coalition as well.
Justin
I mean,
will thank you for
yeah,
that.
but I mean, they're doing that work of trying to protect that throughout New England and have cases. I don't know, I can't remember what some of the cases are recently of different, you know,
It's
First Amendment.
File amicus briefs, friend of the court
There
briefs
was
to try and
Connecticut, wasn't it in
support.
Connecticut? There was a reporter.
Yeah, Bridgeport.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Connecticut, yeah.
This big,
Right, so
was
she showed up,
Cop reporter,
yeah, cop reporter who showed up at a protest, right?
yeah.
And they arrested her.
Showed up at what?
At a protest. She was
protest.
reporting on some protest, and the police arrested her and
Took her away in handcuffs.
Yeah, and took her notebook and.
Thinking that she was a protester?
Well, they
or
knew
just
her
not?
because she.
They knew she was-
So she
very
reported on them.
courageous.
They didn't like her.
They didn't like her, yeah.
They didn't like. She was nosy.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it's,
Well, if you haven't done anything wrong, then you've got nothing to hide.
Right.
Well, in the police state you might have.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the other thing. I mean, I don't know how often you really have the opportunity to go into your police station and ask to see the log. The thing is now, they've become, it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. The arrest, or the call logs, which is what they'll usually have in the lobby, it'll be so bland, it'll just say medical, and things will be blacked out if there's, because of state law that allows redaction of domestic cases.
rape.
Or sexual
There's
assault.
sexual
Sexual
assault,
assault.
so, or it'll say call for disturbance, blank, blank, you know, blacked out, blacked out, blacked out. And so you really have to dig deeper to find out, but you should keep asking for
We
that.
used to print those out with names.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the only things that you'll find arrested pretty much are traffic violations.
We
They
used to be
tend
a
to-
lot more serious when we first had the TNG.
Yeah.
You would see who.
Yeah, the court, yeah, we used to do Westboro. I mean, I'm talking, used to, I only go back 8 years, you know, the
They
Worcester
wouldn't
and
just name the
Westboro.
women that were arrested for prostitution, they would name the Johns
Yeah,
that
right.
were arrested
Right.
too. And I was thinking, you know, well, they named the people who were convicted of assaulting their, you know, spouses or their children, then maybe the incidence number would drop because.
Yes. My first job in Fitchburg at the Sentinel was to go down to City Hall and copy down the marriage intentions. And we printed the marriage intentions in the newspaper. But there was a 10-day,
Just people.
when
working
people go to
agents.
City Hall and file, you know, to get a marriage license. But more than that is, you know, I remember the time where we went to all the local hospitals and got the births. You know, with HIPAA and everything, the
Yeah.
hospital's not gonna do that anymore,
Right,
so.
we used to have in Pittsfield in the hospital. It was a
Oh,
little
really?
item
Yeah,
for
yeah.
in the hospital.
Wow.
Wow.
I had an aunt who always wanted to get in so her name could be in the paper. You can't do it today.
Right,
you know,
right.
you know.
The intention was good, so they'd have best wishes for the folks that
Exactly.
were ill, right?
Exactly. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Kinder, gentler.
Just one last thing, this has come up in other sessions that we've done about this, but hate speech. Why is hate speech protected?
So the way, I think the reason that the courts would say is that there's so much speech that one might find offensive, but we always err on the side of more speech, or we have, rather than less speech. So the test is whether the two things the courts have talked about are if it's a so-called true threat. So you're actually put in imminent fear that I'm going to do something to you. Or there's a category of fighting words, if I'm really, provoking fisticuffs. Then those are forms of hate speech that are not protected. Now there's anti-discrimination laws that prohibits, racial slurs in many situations. There's hate. There are hate crimes that are prosecuted. But the category of hate speech, which the courts don't really recognize, I think the concern is that one person's hate speech is another person's opinion. And so it can be difficult to regulate it without restricting speech rights too much. I think that's the gist of it.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming and,
Yeah, it's great.